and we have refuted the notion that they take perfuming and hold seeds. However, mindless states such as the samadhi of cessation, like samadhi in which consciousness exists, have consciousness provided with sense organs, life, and heat, because those in these states are considered to be sentient beings. From this reasoning we conclude that someone in the samadhi of cessation has a consciousness that does not really leave the body.
Other Sautrantikas have a theory that the sixth consciousness, manovijnana, exists in this state, and that is why the scripture says that consciousness does not leave the body. This is not reasonable, because this state is also called unconscious samadhi. If you claim that the reason it is referred to as unconscious is that the five sense consciousnesses are absent, then all samadhi should be called unconscious, because all lack these five forms of consciousness. The sixth consciousness is included among the six evolving consciousnesses and, like the first five forms, is absent in the samadhi of cessation.
Also, because in this state the mode of activity and objects of this sixth consciousness are imperceptible, then, like life, heat, etc., it is not the sixth consciousness that exists in this state. Finally, if the mode of activity and objects of this consciousness are perceptible in this state, it must resemble other states and not really be samadhi, because the basic purpose for entering this samadhi is to stop those things.
Also, if the sixth consciousness exists in this state, then mind and its activities either exist or do not. If they exist, the scripture could not say that in this state mental activities cease completely. Nor would it be referred to as the samadhi of the cessation of feeling and conceptualization. The Sautrantikas say that, in the preparatory stage of this samadhi, one is disgusted only with feeling and conceptualization, and therefore there is cessation of only feeling and conceptualization in this state. Feeling and conceptualization are strong in assisting the mind and therefore are alone called mental activities. So what is the problem if we speak of the cessation of mental activities? We reply that, in the samadhi of non-conceptualization, only conceptualization must cease, because the individual is only disgusted with conceptualization, but you do not concede this. Since it is only feeling and conceptualization that are strong in assisting the mind, then when these two cease, so should mind. The Sautrantikas reply, just as physical activities cease, in samadhi, but the body itself persists, why insist that mind perishes when its activities cease? We reply, in that case, when the vocal activities of reflection and investigation cease, the voice would not cease, but will you admit this? Activities, samskara, of dharmas are either universal or non-universal. When a universal activity ceases, the dharma it conditions ceases also. When a non-universal activity ceases, the dharma may still exist.
An example of non-universal activities is inspiration and expiration, because when respiration ceases, the body may still exist. Reflection and investigation in speech are universal activities, because if they cease there is no speech. Feeling and conceptualization are also universal activities of mind, because, as you admit, they, like volition, etc., are categorized as activities associated with all thought, mahabhiimika. When feeling and conceptualization cease, mind must cease accordingly. How can it be said that they cease while mind persists?
Also, since you admit that volition, etc., are activities associated with all thought, then when feeling and conceptualization cease, so must they. In that case, such things as faith must also not exist in this state, because when universal activities cease, the others cannot exist either, so how can you claim that they exist? Since you admit that volition, etc., are not non-existent in this state, the same must be so of feeling and conceptualization, because they are activities associated with all thought.
Also, if volition, etc., exist in this samadhi, then so must contact, because there are none of the other mental activities that are not born through the power of contact. And, if you admit that contact exists, in this state, so must feeling, because feeling is conditioned by contact. And, if you admit that feeling exists in this state, conceptualization must occur also, because they are never separated. The Sautrantikas reply, just as feeling conditions craving but not all feeling does so, likewise, contact conditions feeling but not in all cases, and thus consequently your argument is not valid.
This is incorrect, because distinctions need to be made. The Buddha has summed it up by saying that feeling conditions and generates craving only when it is born of contact accompanied by ignorance. Nowhere did he say that contact generates feeling. Therefore, when contact exists, there will be feeling. The principle that feeling occurs with conceptualization is certain. In other words, feeling and conceptualization must not cease, as in other states, because you maintain that in this state, volition, etc., exist. If you admit this, then you reject the word of the scriptural cessation of mental activities, and consequently lose the sense of samadhi of the cessation of feeling and conceptualization.
38. Mind without mental activities. In reply to a Sautrantika claim that mental consciousness without its activities exists in samadhi, we reply, if the mental activities do not exist, neither does consciousness, because no other mind is found apart from mental activity, because when universal mental activities cease, so does the dharma they characterize, because feeling, etc., would not be activities associated with all thought, mahabhiimika, and because this consciousness, argued by the opponents, would not be associated with anything. If you admit this, then this consciousness also has no supporting objects, and will resemble form more than mind.
Also, a scripture says, mental consciousness is conditioned by and generated by thoughts and dharmas. The union of these three is contact, and simultaneously with that arise feeling, conceptualization, and volition. If mental consciousness exists in samadhi, the three must be united and must therefore include contact. Since contact is always united with feeling, conceptualization, and volition, how can you have consciousness but not mental activities?
The Sautrantikas reply, even though at other times the union of the three has power to produce contact and, through contact, generate feeling, etc., still, as a result of producing disgust with mental activities prior to entering samadhi, in this state these three things have no power and so do not generate contact, thus feckling, etc., also do not occur. We reply, in that case, you ought to call it the samadhi of the cessation of mental activities, not the samadhi of the cessation of feeling and conceptualization. The Sautrantikas reply, when disgust occurs, it is disgust with only feeling and conceptualization, and when these two cease, all other mental activities also cease. The name of the samadhi derives from the prior disgust with feeling and conceptualization. We reply, in that case, the mind must cease in this samadhi, because mind is associated with the feeling, etc., with which one is disgusted, just like other mental activities. Otherwise, how can it be called mindless samadhi? Also, what is the nature of this mental consciousness that exists in samadhi? It cannot be soiled or indeterminate, for these reasons. 1. These things, impurity, etc., do not exist in samadhi, which is itself categorized as good. 2. Other impure and indeterminate minds must